there is a good chance your great-grandmother never stepped inside a pharmacy, not because she couldn't afford to, not because there wasn't one nearby, although in many cases there wasn't. She didn't go because she didn't need to. What she needed was already growing along the fence line behind her house. Honeysuckle for fever, elderberry for the flu, passion flower to calm a child who couldn't sleep, rose hips crushed into a syrup when someone needed to get through the winter without falling apart. This wasn't folk medicine in the way that term gets used today, as though it means something quaint and unserious. This was primary care. It was the front line of family health for most of human history, and at some point, within living memory, it was almost entirely erased. The plants that grew along fences and hedgerows across rural America, across Europe, across Asia, across Central and South America, were not random. They were deliberately cultivated. Families passed down specific knowledge about what to grow along a boundary line, not just for property marking or privacy, but because a fence was the most practical place to grow a living medicine cabinet. Climbing plants and sprawling shrubs took up no field space. They required almost no maintenance. They produced year after year without replanting, and they provided a range of medicinal applications that covered the majority of what a rural household would face in any given season. A fence line was not decoration, it was infrastructure. Honeysuckle is one of the clearest examples. In the American South, almost everyone over a certain age remembers pulling honeysuckle blossoms off a fence and tasting the nectar. It is one of the most persistent sensory memories of rural childhood. But what most people were never told is that honeysuckle has been one of the most important medicinal plants in Chinese medicine for over 1,000 years. It is known as Jinyinhua, and it was used to treat infections, reduce fevers, and address inflammation long before anyone understood the chemistry behind why it worked. It wasn't a guess. It was a system. Rural families in the American South were growing the same plant, using it in teas and poultices for sore throats and skin infections, without ever knowing their methods mirrored practices documented in Chinese pharmacopoeias centuries earlier. Two cultures, separated by oceans and with no shared medical tradition, arrived at the same conclusion independently. That is not folklore. That is convergent empirical knowledge built over generations of careful observation. Passion flower tells an even more pointed story. Passiflora incarnata is native to the southeastern United States. It was used by the Cherokee and other indigenous peoples as a calming agent, a sleep aid, and a treatment for anxiety and restlessness. European colonists encountered it, adopted it, and eventually it was so well regarded that it was included in the United States Pharmacopoeia, the official compendium of drug standards in this country. That is worth pausing on. This was not a fringe recommendation. It was a recognized medicine, not an alternative, not a supplement, a listed pharmaceutical standard. And the plant that earned that recognition climbs fences. It grows in ditches. It requires almost nothing to cultivate. For decades, it was part of the official medical framework in America. Then it was removed, not because it stopped working, not because it was found to be dangerous. It was removed because the regulatory framework shifted to favor compounds that could be isolated, synthesized in a laboratory, and patented. A plant that grows on a fence cannot be patented. There is no intellectual property in a vine, and without a patent, there is no profit structure that justifies the marketing, distribution, and institutional support that modern pharmaceutical sales require. This pattern is not unique to passion flower. It is the central pattern of how an entire category of medicine was displaced in the 20th century. Elderberry is perhaps the most dramatic case. Sambucus, in both its European and American species, has been used for centuries as an immune support during cold and flu season. Elderberry syrup was a household staple across the Appalachian region, across the British Isles, across Scandinavia and Central Europe. Families made it themselves from berries that grew in hedgerows and along fence lines without any commercial input. The cost was zero. The preparation was simple, and the results were consistent enough that the practice endured for hundreds of years across dozens of cultures. Today, elderberry is a supplement industry worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. You can buy elderberry gummies, elderberry capsules, elderberry syrups with branded labels and premium pricing in virtually any pharmacy or health food store in the country. The same compound, the same plant, the same berry your great-grandmother picked for free from a bush growing along her back fence. The only difference is that now someone else picks it, processes it, packages it, and sells it back to you at a significant markup. The knowledge was not lost because it was wrong. It was lost because it was free. Rose hips may be the most historically verifiable example of all. During the Second World War, Britain was cut off from its citrus supply lines. Vitamin C deficiency became a genuine public health threat, especially for children. The British government responded not by developing a synthetic supplement, but by organizing a massive volunteer campaign to harvest rose hips from hedgerows and fence lines across the countryside. Thousands of volunteers, many of them schoolchildren, gathered rose hips by the ton. Rose hip syrup was produced on a national scale and distributed to families to prevent scurvy and maintain immune function during wartime rationing. It worked. Climbing roses and wild rose bushes had been growing along fences and stone walls for centuries, and the hips they produced contained more vitamin C per gram than almost any citrus fruit available at the time. This was not a secret. It was official government policy during a moment of genuine national crisis. And after the war ended, after citrus imports resumed and the pharmaceutical vitamin industry expanded rapidly, the entire rose hip campaign was quietly shelved. Within a single generation, most families had forgotten it entirely. The roses kept growing. The hips kept forming every autumn. But no one was teaching their children what they were for anymore. There is another plant that makes this pattern almost impossible to ignore. Kudzu. In the American South, kudzu is treated as a punchline. It is the vine that ate the South, an invasive menace that swallows abandoned barns and smothers telephone poles. What almost no one in America is taught is that kudzu has been used in Chinese medicine for over 2,000 years. Its root, known as ji, was prescribed for cardiovascular problems, alcohol dependence, fever, and digestive disorders. It remains in active clinical use in parts of Asia today. The same plant that Americans spray herbicide on and curse it was, for 2 millennia on the other side of the world, a respected and well-documented medicine. It climbs everything. It grows without encouragement. It is effectively free. And in the one country where it grows most aggressively, it is treated as worthless. This is where the pattern becomes difficult to explain away as coincidence. Across every one of these cases, the sequence is almost identical. A plant with demonstrated medicinal value, grows freely and requires minimal care. It is used effectively by households for generations, sometimes for centuries. An industrial alternative emerges that can be manufactured, standardized, and sold at a profit. The industrial version is promoted through medical schools, professional licensing requirements, and regulatory frameworks. The free version is not banned outright. It is simply no longer taught. It falls out of school curricula. It disappears from medical training. Home economics courses, which once included basic herbal preparation as standard household knowledge, are gutted or eliminated entirely from public schools. county extension programs that used to teach families how to manage household health from their own gardens shift their focus to commercial agriculture. The grandmother who knew what every vine on her fence was good for watches her grandchildren grow up without any of that knowledge, and there is no institution left that considers it worth preserving. No one had to conspire to make this happen. The explanation is simpler than conspiracy, and in many ways harder to fix. A product that cannot be monetized will not be promoted by any system that runs on revenue. A solution that exists outside the market will not be supported by institutions that depend on market activity to survive. This is not corruption in the dramatic sense. It is something quieter and in many ways more effective. It is the slow generational replacement of self-sufficiency with dependence, not through force, but through forgetting. And the forgetting has a measurable cost. The average American over 65 now spends thousands of dollars a year on prescription medications and over-the-counter supplements. A significant portion of those supplements are derived from or directly inspired by the same compounds found in plants that once grew on household fence lines for free. The gap between what people pay now and what their grandparents paid for equivalent function is not a medical gap. It is a knowledge gap. The chemistry has not changed. The plants have not changed. What changed is that one generation stopped teaching the next generation what was already growing in the yard. This is not an argument against modern medicine. There are things modern medicine does that no plant growing on a fence will ever replicate. Emergency surgery, acute infection management, diagnostic imaging. These are genuine achievements. But the majority of what most households manage on a routine basis, sleep difficulty, seasonal immune challenges, low-grade inflammation, digestive discomfort, stress and anxiety. These are precisely the categories that fence-line plants addressed for centuries before any of us were born. And they address them at zero cost, with zero dependence on a supply chain, and with zero need for a prescription. The plants are still there. Honeysuckle still climbs fences from Virginia to Texas. Passion flower still grows wild across the southeast. Elderberry still fruits along roadsides and property edges every summer. Rose hips still form on old climbing roses every autumn. Kudzu is still swallowing everything in sight across a dozen states. These are not exotic species that require special knowledge to find. In many cases, they are growing within walking distance of where you are sitting right now. The only thing that is missing is the knowledge of what to do with them. Your great-grandmother did not have a medical degree. She did not have a monthly subscription to a supplement company. She did not need an app or a website to tell her what to take when someone in her house woke up with a fever or couldn't fall asleep. She walked to the fence. She knew what was growing there. She knew what each plant was for. And she knew how to use it because someone before her had taken the time to teach her. That chain was not broken by accident. It was broken by economics. But the remarkable thing, the thing that should give you some real sense of possibility, is that everything you would need to rebuild it is still growing. Right where it always was. The fence is still there. The only question is whether anyone remembers what it was for.